All right, so for our next book in my school, we're going to attempt to understand Mason and Dixon. This is a Thomas Pynchon novel that came out in 1997, and I read about about what I'm going to talk about here, the first 100 pages or so on the transit of Venus, and just never got back to it. Now I have gone through Gravity's Rainbow on YouTube and in this class, and on YouTube I've gone through V, his first novel, chapter by chapter, and The Crying of Lot 49, which, by the way, that's the best introduction to Pynchon right there because it's short and it's very, very good. And then we've got this monster. Word is it's his best book, either this or certainly his three best books, obviously, are Gravity's Rainbow, this, and Against the Day. Again, there with Against the Day, I read a bit of it when it came out, and it was pretty powerful stuff. It seemed like some of his best writing. He is a stylistic chameleon, like Joyce, also very erudite, like Joyce, maybe not quite as erudite because Joyce was a master of languages. He knew I don't know how many languages, in addition to Greek, Latin, and Hebrew, a whole bunch of others. And with that kind of erudition, there's just no competition. I don't get the feeling that Pynchon is, though he's erudite, is a language junkie. But he is certainly a master of the English language. Now, this is written in the style of an 18th century English prose novel where they're, still in German, they're capitalizing nouns. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but once it clicks, you just start moving right along into it. What I want to do here is talk about the first part of the book. Book 1 is Latitudes and Departures, and its first subsection is Roman numeral 1 for the first 104 pages of the hardcover edition, which is what I'm using, the 1997 hardcover edition. And so what we have here are these two fellows, both of right about the age of 30, Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon, and they are British. Charles Mason is part of the Royal Society, although he becomes the mentor here for Jeremiah Dixon, who is an autodidact. Jeremiah Dixon. He's more a cartographer than he is an astronomer. He's only an amateur astronomer, but he's a self-taught surveyor, land surveyor, and cartographer. And he's kind of a rube from the hills. The county that he's from, I believe it was Durham County. I don't know anything about it, but Mason said he almost threw Dixon's letter away that he sent to him, but because he was from that area. It's like nothing good can come out of Durham. So now it's interesting because we have here part of an acculturation process that's going on in North America, whereby when a new population enters a landscape and conquers and subjects its inhabitants to their sign regime, to borrow a term from Deleuze and Guattari, for a while it will prevail, but eventually the victory will go to the sign regime. That is to say, the native semiotic and mythological symbological system of the native indigenous inhabitants will slowly rise up to the surface of the culture and become part of it. This happens with the Indo-Aryans, the Vedic Aryans, when they invade India, with their very patriarchal, non-interested in goddess mentality. But native to Harappan civilization was yoga and the goddess and the cosmic cycle. And gradually over time, that absorbs, digests, and breaks down as though these were intellectual enzymes, the incoming invaders' patriarchal dragon-slaying mentality, and absorbs it to become a very pessimistic, goddess-worshipping, human-sacrificing type of culture, which the Indo-Aryans simply were not. Same thing is happening here. Most of the I would say about half of our comic book superheroes are Native American characters. They have come up through the surface. It doesn't make the slightest bit of difference whether the creators in New York, such as Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, or any of the creators of Bill Finger, who created Batman. It's a myth that used to be thought it was created by Bob Kane, but it wasn't. Bob Kane was a charlatan. Batman is a very strong Native American character, especially in Mesoamerican. Spider-Man, not so much as Spider-Woman. She's the big character in Hopi and Navajo mythology. Wolverine is there, Wasp, Black Widow, Ant-Man. Those are all Native American characters. So we've got about half of them coming up in that respect. And now, with respect to the myth of the twins, Paul Redan was the great Native American studies expert who said that the key symbol or the key myth, you might use Spengler's term, the symbol of all Native American mythology is the myth of the twins. In every one of their cultures you find it. Back in the Midwest, the characters are flint and sapling. Flint is connected with stone, hence with the hunting world of the shaman. Sapling is connected with plants and with the agricultural world that comes in and lays down another stratum, a semiotic stratum on top of that. And then we have, in the Popol Vuh, we have Spelunky and I've forgotten the other guy's name, who are also twins. Where the two came to their father is Joseph Campbell's first book, his study of the twins there in Navajo myth, which is Monster Slayer and Child Born of Water. Child Born of Water being the shaman and the Monster Slayer being the warrior hero. That's generally the archetypology of it. So it's everywhere. Here I think this is what we have, an acculturation process where now we have the activation of the archetype of the twins in highbrow, or perhaps middlebrow, since Pynchon likes popular culture just as much as he likes highbrow. So he exists somewhere in a middlebrow realm between them. Now, Charles Mason then is an astronomer born in 1728 and dies in 1786. And this novel occupies the years from 1761 down to 1767. The actual surveying process of laying down the Mason-Dixon line, which ends up being a 233-mile line separating Maryland from Pennsylvania, takes place in 5 years, between 1763 to 67. The novel opens, however, in 1761 when they are going, ostensibly anyway, to the island of Sumatra to study the transit of Venus there. I'm going to say a few more things about their names because there's lots of hermetic stuff going on here that I'm pretty sure Pynchon was very conscious of. Mason is a Taurus in the Western tropical system because there are at least two different zodiacs. We've got the Vedic system, which is sidereal, and they stick with the actual positions of where the planets are with respect to the background of the fixed stars. The West ignores the background of the fixed stars and says that every time March 21st rolls around, we're in Aries. Well, we're not in Aries. The precession of the equinox has landed us backwards 23.5 degrees, something like that, backwards, where we are processing through Pisces, and now we're getting ready to enter the age of Aquarius in about another century or two. Depends on how you draw the lines here. So we've got two different zodiacs, but in the tropical, Charles Mason is a Taurus and Jeremiah Dixon is a Leo. Now, of course, those are opposite signs. Taurus is a pragmatic sign. It's an introverted sign. Leo is an extroverted sign, not particularly pragmatic, very energetic. Like the problem regarding the sidereal versus the tropic turns up with Goethe. I was reading Rudiger Safransky's marvelous biography of Goethe. And he was born a Virgo in the Western tropical system. But man, that dude was a Leo if ever a Leo ever existed. He had to be the center of attention no matter where he went. So apparently in his case, the sidereal works for his personality sign. So I don't stick with one or the other system. It just depends on the individual. The tropical works better for me. I'm way more of a Cancer than I would be in the sidereal system. I'd be a Gemini, which there again is an extroverted sign. Cancers are introverted. So with Mason, we have the Taurus. Now, they have this series of oppositions Pynchon has a lot of fun with, where Mason likes wine and Dixon likes beer. Good, so they won't break into each other's stash. Dixon is a Quaker, and Charles Mason is an Anglican who has suspicions about Quakers. The one looks up, and notice that it's the one with the earth sign. Taurus is an earth sign who's the astronomer who looks up, so he is doing his vocation is the exact opposite of what his personality type is. Same thing with Dixon, whose sign should be, it's Leo, which is a fire sign, so he should be looking up, but yet he's a cartographer, he's studying the earth. I guess it would have been a little too neat if the case had been the opposite. But Pynchon likes asymmetries. This is part of the postmodern novel where things don't always quite fit the way that you want them to. Truth is a very slippery thing in the postmodern paradigm. So let's see here. Taurus is ruled by Venus, so keep that in mind. They're going to study the transit of Venus, where she will go between the Earth and the Sun and appear like a little black spot as she goes across the Sun. And they're interested in obtaining the parallax, which they've sent. The Royal Society has sent another team out to the island of St. Helena, Napoleon's island where he was exiled, to get an information reading there. They might have a third team. I think it might be 3 teams around the globe so that they can each compare and contrast their data to figure out what the exact distance between the Earth, Venus and the Sun is, and also the Earth to Venus and to the Sun and so forth. They can use mathematics to work all that out and figure out these exact distances. That's why the transit is so important. And the transit only happens of Venus roughly every 100 years, although they come in pairs. This transit happened in 1761. 8 years later, there will be another one. So they occur in pairs separated by 8 years, and then after that, it's like every century, roughly 105 years, something like that. And so Venus has an 8-year cycle, which it has the sidereal cycle of Venus is how long it takes to go around the Sun. And that's 222 days, so it's like 3/4 of a year. Its transits, if you're looking at this from an astrological point of view, on your personal birth chart, last for about a week, unless she goes retrograde. And then, so we have that. Okay, and so Venus rules. Now, Venus, by the way, I should say that though the planet across all the cultures on the planet, if you look at they all have differing signs for the zodiac. Some are the same. But for the planets, the archetypes are always the same. For example, Venus in all the cultures, China, India, Mesoamerica, always has to do with sex and love, or that which is pleasing to the senses. But the western half of the world sees her as female, starting with Inanna, the goddess of sex and love and beauty in ancient Sumer. That's the first recorded version of Venus that we have. That then migrates west, and she's always female in the west. And in India, though, however, it's male. And in China, it's male, but it still has to do with sex and love. And it's also male across the water in Mesoamerica. So the archetype remains the same, though the gender projections are different. Okay, and then, right. So now let's look at at the hermetics here of their names. So we have Mason and Dixon. So a Mason is a stonemason. That's where it comes from. The Normans brought it over after 1066 when they invaded England. They brought the surname, the last name, Mason. And then Dixon simply means someone who, it's just a version of D-I-C-K, which is somebody who is a variation of Richard. One of the Richards, probably. First, second, or third, one of those guys. So there's that. But now if we look at the letter M versus the letter D, what do we find out? So the letter M in Hebrew is mem, and it means water. So it would have been written with the wavy sign that we use for Aquarius, which is one of the oldest pictographs in the world because you can find it all over. It's there in ancient Sumer, and it's there even back before that on pottery shards, going well back into the Sumerian Neolithic. So the letter M is simply a stylized drawing of a wave of water. Interesting that it becomes associated with mare and mare and mother. Okay, so it's water. And Aquarius, by the way, is a sign that is connected with science and technology. So that suits Mason to a T. And then the letter D in Hebrew is Daleth, and it means a doorway. So notice that we've got this opposition right there between the M and the D with water that flows and moves. It's a flow. The M it's meant to represent flow. Whereas with a doorway, especially if you hit a locked door, there's a striation there. In Deleuze and Guattari's smooth space on the one hand, and then now we have a striation, a blockage. The door can either be open or closed, depending on how you encounter it or want to see it, just as with a glass, is the glass half empty or is it half full? Depends on your attitude. But either way, so it's interesting then too that Venus creeps in here because the door is associated with the planet Venus in the Hebrew system or in the Western Hermetic system, and the tarot card is the Empress, and the Empress is linked with Venus, especially on the Rider-Waite deck. He drew the symbol of the planet Venus on the Empress card. So we have Venus creeping in there in the D of Dixon's last name. Now, with regard to the M, the corresponding card is the Hanged Man, which is the 12th card of the series. And the Hanged Man has been associated now with Neptune, with the planet Neptune, which I find interesting because we're back to Mason here with the stylized water sigil that's equated with Aquarius, and Neptune now rules Aquarius. So that's a very interesting thing going on there. And then the numbers. So in the Hebrew system, the letter D has the numeric value of 4, and the letter M has the numeric value of 40. So when you add those together, 40 plus 4, we get 44. And then if we reduce them by combining 4 and 4, we get 8, which is the number for Venus. It takes 8 years for Venus to create this other cycle, not the 222-day sidereal cycle, but the cycle whereby you will find her in the exact same spot of the zodiac that she was in 8 years ago. And she creates a flower, a 5-petaled flower in the sky from the way that we observe her, from the motions that she makes. Forms a 5-petaled flower. Okay, so there's Venus there again, reducing in the numbers, in the D of Dixon's name. And then we've got the transit of Venus. Now, I will say this, I didn't make the chart, I should have, but the transit of Venus, what that is astrologically, it's the conjunction of Venus and the Sun. So they're conjunct when that happens, which is a very happy, fortunate combination. That's not rare or anything in astrology. It's only rare in the astronomical world of the optics of being on the Earth and looking at the sky and studying it. Venus brings good luck. It rules anything that has anything to do with the senses, that which is pleasing to the senses, sex, money, food, all that kind of stuff. So when the transit does happen, he has... they never make it to Sumatra, so they have to stop at the Cape Town in South Africa. So they're all the way at the south tip of the world, almost not that far away from Antarctica. And so they have to observe it from there. And this is a Dutch colony that's there that has enslaved the native black population, as is well known, of course. And during the transit, everybody sort of gets along for a while. All of a sudden, the masters stop abusing their slaves for a couple of weeks, but it doesn't take them long to go back to it. So that's the kind of effect that Venus has. But this takes place in the tropical zodiac. But if we look at the sidereal zodiac, which is 23.5 degrees backwards, then the conjunction will take place in Taurus, in the sign of Taurus, which is ruled by Venus, which I find really interesting there, because Taurus is the moon god, was originally associated with Osiris and Dumuzi and characters like that, because the crescent horns resemble the crescent horns of the moon. In Sumer, the moon god was male, as the moon god most originally was, and the sun was female. Only the Indo-Aryans, who come around 1500 BC and invade everyone, changes the gender association to the sun as the solar hero who slays the dragons of the night, the zodiac as it leaves, chases those animals away, and the moon is female. But in the older system, the moon was male, because the moon dies and revives. And that is the phallic rhythm of civilization. The towers and ziggurats and pyramids built up, and then gradually they fall down. So there's a male phallic rhythm to civilization as it evolves over time. And that's originally why it was associated with the moon god and the sun goddess, because the goddess is eternal. Her energy, her Shakti energy, is the absolute eternal energy from out of which the temporary phenomenon of the male dying and reviving god takes place. That's only a temporary thing. So all of that is signified in this wonderful book here, in these first 104 pages. Absolutely fantastic. All the stuff that he manages to work in here for them to go on this journey. And it's a lot of fun how they meet. They write, Dixon, who is the subordinate to Mason, writes a tentative letter that Mason receives, and he says, I almost threw it out because it says you were from County Durham. And then, so then they arrange to meet in a hysterically funny chapter. I think it's the third, or is it the fourth? Might be the third. It's the third, So they meet in London, which is a place well frequented by Mason, who's an inhabitant of Fleet Street, where all the astronomers of the time, such as Edmund Halley, were working. His mentor is Neville Maskelyne. And so they meet, and then they both like to drink. So they go to a tavern where they encounter a talking dog, which I think is really funny. It was great because just a couple of months ago, in June, was published the Mason and Dixon Companion. So that just came out by Brett Biebel, and it's very good. It's a line-by-line commentary. And then, so now but he misses this. The dog is meant to point to the dog, the black poodle in Faust, who shows up and then transforms into Mephistopheles. So there's that reference of the dog, but there's also the fact that we're at a tavern. And the tavern refers to Auerbach's cellar, the tavern that they go to, Faust and Mephistopheles, at the beginning of Faust, which then also comes in as the tavern in Moby Dick at the beginning. And of course, this later becomes the cantina in Star Wars. So that it represents the threshold of adventure, where you're there, where all these other fellows have been out on the adventure and they have come back, and you're the neophyte, you're the naive one. You haven't been out on the adventure yet, but you're about to. So it's the threshold of adventure is what it signifies, to use Joseph Campbell's terminology. And so the dog also is, it stands up and it sings a little song in English, which was very funny. And that is taken from Ulysses. There's a scene in Ulysses when they're in a tavern, and there's a dog, I think it's a German shepherd, who composes a poem in his head about how the dog thinks humans would perceive it. So, and it's hysterically funny. So clearly Pynchon is giving a tip of the hat here to Joyce, to Moby Dick, to Faust, in other words, to the great stuff, the stuff that's worth reading, that people will be reading 5 centuries from now, not fucking John Grisham or whatever, Stephen King. That stuff is just pulp garbage. It has no future whatsoever. And then so it's also the in a way it's like Chewbacca in Star Wars. The dog is the companion of the hero insofar as the dog, and think of the card of the fool who has the barking dog yapping behind him as he's about to go over the cliff. The dog is connected with the underworld, always, 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 no exceptions anywhere in mythology. The dog is the underworld, whether it's the wolf out here in the Southwest, it's the coyote in the mythologies out here, and the dog is primordially the opposite to the bird. So you get the bird and the dog. In Hohokam mythology, it's the coyote and the hawk, or the buzzard, which is a type of hawk. So you get this primordial bird-dog opposition. The bird always is the upper world. The dog always is the underworld. Think of Cerberus, the 3-headed dog. Yama, who is in Indian mythology, the god of the dead there, has 2 dogs. And then there's another god of the dead named Yama in Chinese mythology. They probably borrowed the name from him, who also has a dog. And it could, of course, also be a reference astrologically to Canis Minor, perhaps. Possibly. And, okay, so all of this is very funny. Pynchon knows the symbolism. He knows what he's doing. The bird doesn't show up yet for a bit. And then we get a Madame Sesostris character that they encounter. This old woman who's Hepsy is her name, the Pythoness of the Point, and she is the Delphic oracle. Now, the thing with Mason is that his wife died 2 years earlier, and he's still kind of in grief, mourning the death of his first wife. And so he's thinking that either the dog or even though this is the Age of Reason, and Pynchon has him say that in here, he's mocking the Age of Reason, of course, which is past. It was a fad, it's gone. We're entering into the second religious now that Spengler predicted and that Pynchon is very well aware of. And he thinks maybe that either the dog or the oracle can contact his wife in the afterlife so that he can talk to her. But that's not what happens. Instead, she prophesies that their ship will be attacked by a French frigate, because at this time during the 7 Years' War in the middle of the 18th century, the French and the British are at war with each other. And the prophecy is absolutely 100% correct. They encounter, once they set sail down the English Channel, a French frigate almost immediately with something like 36 cannons, and I think they only have 24, just blows the ship almost to smithereens. Mason and Dixon are down below the whole time, terrified for the first time they've ever come into contact with any kind of war activity, and they barely make it out alive, and then they have to go back to harbor, back to England, and rebuild the ship. And all of that is true. But one thing that isn't true here, and I think it's interesting that he changed this, it says here that on page 29 that they left on Friday, January 9th, 1761, but I'm reading a book about Mason and Dixon called Drawing the Line, which is a factual book, and it's excellent, by the way. They left on Thursday, January the 8th, 1761. That's the historical fact. So you have to wonder, why does Mason change the date to the 9th of January, which fell on a Friday, rather than the Thursday, Thor's Day of the patriarchal Indo-Aryan world? Instead, he switches it to Freya Day. Freya is the Scandinavian equivalent of Venus. So he deliberately sets it on the day of Venus because they're headed for a transit of Venus. And Venus is woven into their names, as I just demonstrated hermetically. So I find that fascinating. Every single detail counts in a Thomas Pynchon novel, just as it does in a Joyce novel. There's not one random thing. If it seems random to you, it's because you don't know what's going on. And then, so they get set up, spend the next few chapters setting up the voyage, just like in Moby Dick. Obvious allusions to Moby Dick here abound all over the place. Okay, so that's pretty much what goes on. Well, there's this there's the funny stuff that takes place with the family on where they have to land. They can't make it to Sumatra because at Bencoolen, Sumatra, because the French have already taken it. There's no way they've already had a bad encounter with the French, so they have to settle for taking the measurements in Cape Town. And they're staying with a Dutch family. Cornelius and Johanna Vroom is the family that is hosting them. And they have these 3 blonde, nubile daughters. One of them is 12. The next oldest one might be 15. There might be an older one, 18, something like that. But they're all flirty with Mason. Dixon they don't care about. They regard him as a rube. But Mason has prestige. He's in the mourning for his wife. One of them could be his next wife. So they're constantly flirting with him, and it's driving him crazy because he can't think with all this erotic energy going on. But what they really want to do is get him riled up so that he'll have sex with their slave, a woman named Ostra, which means south. And because if she has a slave who's half white, then they can fetch a better price on the slave market for a slave that has white skin. So that's what they're trying to get Mason to do. It's very comical, lots of funny stuff. But of course, Mason is too smart to fall for that. He does not. And Dixon is an extrovert. He likes to go out carousing from bar to bar every night. Sometimes he drags Mason along with him. And the two are kind of like a comedy team. It's very funny. And then finally they do the measurement, which is for them almost the way that Pynchon describes the transit of Venus is for them almost a religious revelation. They describe it as once that black dot of Venus appears within the lens of the telescope, now Venus, a goddess made out of light and ether, now becomes concrete and solid. It is as though the Word has been made flesh, only it's a female. It's a goddess that is incarnating on the physical plane as that dot of Venus moving across the face of the sun. So for them, it's a religious experience, and almost like a ritual, like a mass, which is fantastic. And it also, of course, connects back to V. One of the names for V was Venus. So this is a way that Pynchon has. He's very playful about how he interweaves his books. You get V, and then Gravity's Rainbow could have been called V2, since it's about the V2 rocket, but that's a phallic image, whereas the V vagina in V is vaginal. And here again we have Venus, the mistress of the genitals, and Pynchon weaving back his initial starting point, the theme of the goddess from V. So that's why he starts here with this first 100 pages to cover. In lesser hands, I think a lesser author would have ignored the transit of Venus and just started with them coming to America in 1763 to begin laying down the line to settle the dispute between William Penn and Lord Balt and Calvert. Okay, so I'll leave it there for the introduction to understanding Mason and Dixon. Now, I also do astrology readings. Those are $150 for a 1-hour reading on Zoom. Some people think that's expensive. It's actually on the low end for astrological fees. If you look up the average for an astrological fee, it's usually around $200. Some of them charge $400 to $500. But if you think that's too expensive, I wonder what price it is to have your spiritual problems resolved and worked out, which I guarantee you that the astrology reading will do. Is that worth $150 to you? I would think it would be worth one fuck of a lot more than $150 to have someone help you sort out your spiritual problems. And astrology is one of the best tools for doing that. It's very, very concrete. It's not some obscurantist New Age science. There's a reason why it was bound up with the West's hermetic tradition for century after century after century after century, because it works. So there's that. Just contact me at my Gmail, which is johndavidebert@gmail.com for that. And also, if you want to purchase any of the previous courses, we've constructed something like 15 of them. And those average about $150 each for usually for about 16 videos that I can send you. We've done everything from German idealist philosophy, the history of it, through Nietzsche, philosophies of history, understanding the hermetic tradition, a course on Jung, a course on understanding comparative mythology, and one on the history of transformations of consciousness, where we go through and talk about the ideas of Rudolf Steiner, Sri Aurobindo, Teilhard de Chardin, Erich Neumann, Jean Gebser, all of the greats, the stellar celebrities in the field of evolution of consciousness studies. We go through all of that. So right now for the philosophy department, we're in the middle of understanding Paul Virilio. We had just finished Jean Baudrillard, and so we're in the middle of Virilio. And then after the Virilio class, we're going to do a course, an 8-week course on Martin Heidegger. So we'll need to go through Heidegger before we get to Derrida and Foucault and so forth, because Heidegger is a prerequisite for that. So there again, if you're interested in any of that stuff, hit me up at my Gmail, johndavidebert@gmail.com. All right, that's it. I look forward to seeing you in class.